Wow. Here we are. My name is Joanna, and I would like to welcome you to a event on Esoterica of East and West. And this is intended as a kind of, I'm just looking here. This is intended as a kind of introductory event. And if it goes well, and if people are interested, hi Amar. I have one viewer already. Thank you. 8 others are supposed to be coming, so it's almost time. So I intended as a kind of opening event, and if it works well, if there are at least 2 people apart from myself. Hi Nadine, how are you? Hi. If other people, maybe I'll just wait for people to join before I start talking. Hi Deej. Hi. Love you guys. It's so exciting, but I am a nervous wreck because it's my first time. So you send me good vibes. Hi, Ortiz. We have 3 people, fantastic. About 5 others said they're going to join, but I think some people may be confused and they will go to my personal page. So rather than public page. So let's wait a moment, maybe. Thank you, Deej. I hope that it will work for all of us. And as I was, I actually started talking a bit early, and then I realized that I didn't go live. So, so that's why I said I need your support because IT-wise, you know, it's the first time for me. So if this event interests you and you would be interested in doing it perhaps once a month or even once every 2 months or so with more specific topics, we could do as a Zoom meeting, which would make it more equal because everybody is then on camera and everybody can contribute equally, because I don't want to make it about me. I want to make it about us having a discussion about the esoterica of East and West, and perhaps a more practical application for the seekers, because there are some forums, like for example Miguel's forum, which is fantastic. This man is like has encyclopedic knowledge of Gnosticism, and I always ask him, you know, for books to read and so on. I love his show. But here I would like to focus more on a kind of praxis, you know, what can we really do to advance ourselves towards liberation, basically, which in Hinduism and esoteric traditions of the East that I am involved with, as well as Gnosticism, is called moksha, basically liberation. So we are going to look at the traditions that are very esoteric, which means they are not mainstream traditions of any religion. Yeah, absolutely, Ditch. Miguel is a rock star, totally. So, unless you have some questions, and please feel free to type them or send me a message, I'm just going to start, you know, general introduction, perhaps say something about myself, and then we move on to possible topics and so on. But my general idea is that we'll compare Eastern and Western esoterica a little bit and see perhaps the common things there and how we can practice it actually, rather than just discussing the details of it. So like most of you, I believe, it's probably everybody here in this forum, you know, I was born Catholic, and I was trying to be a good Catholic for a long time, but I realized that, you know, the dogma was like a big barrier, and it didn't give me any spiritual nourishment. And also I was puzzled by the concept of guilt and the concept of sin. And my first exposure to the Eastern philosophy was actually through the traditional Eastern philosophy, Vedanta, and I studied with a Vedantin master for a while, which basically what attracted me to that, it was that there is no idea of sin there. There's nothing like sin. It's a completely Western invention. So in Vedanta and in Hinduism in general, there is no sin, there's just ignorance. And ignorance is basically this mental barrier between us and the divine. But what is beautiful about Eastern esoteric traditions is that they give us tools to overcome this barrier. And also, because there is no sin, there is no guilt. The sin as such is believed to be basically a mental anxiety, a depression, a wrong state of mind. But there's nothing like sin, right? And so that was the basic attraction for me, that I realized that it's basically ignorance. And this is very similar to what Gnostics say as well, that ignorance is basically the core evil, so to speak. And it's sometimes personalized as for example, demiurge and archons and archons or so on. So, which I don't deny that they exist, but it's basically a kind of big barrier. And then I move on to another teacher from now esoteric teacher from the East, from Kashmir Shaivism, philosophy of Kashmir Shaivism, which is basically a tantric philosophy. So it's a philosophy of Tantra, which basically says the same thing, except it also adds that not only there is no sin, but they actually believe that in a way there is no evil. So what does it mean? It means that everything is basically a dance of consciousness. If everything is dance of consciousness, so it's like divine consciousness. We are part and a particle of divine consciousness that just explores itself through, doing different things, experiencing different things, and nothing is evil. And actually, on a highest level, there's nothing good or bad, and morality as such is only applicable to human society. That doesn't mean that we should not conduct ourselves in a proper way, because otherwise we fall into lower state of consciousness. But basically, it is a big dance of consciousness, because divine consciousness is we are embodiment of divine consciousness. And another thing that attracted me to the philosophy of Tantra is the acceptance of a feminine principle, of a principle of a goddess Shakti, which is basically this creative power that dances the universe. Because in Kashmir Shaivism there is Shiva, which is kind of unawakened divine consciousness, and then there is a Shakti, which actually awakens Shiva for creation. So this is a very beautiful sort of metaphor. So I don't know, do we have any other questions about it? Because I'm not sure if it is relevant to anybody. Okay, if there are no any questions, I will continue. So basically, what in Vedanta is illusion, which is this big barrier between us and the divine, in Gnosticism we would probably call demiurge. So it's this barrier, something that keeps us away from the divine. Like, we know that we are more than we are, that we're experiencing ourselves as, but we don't know how to get over this. And I was actually very happy with, with Tantra, and I was very happy with Kashmir Shaivism. And if somebody wants me to talk about Tantra more, please just let me know, because as I say, I just depend a little bit on your interest as well. When I got an invitation through two guys, to go to Israel, Palestine, because they believe they discovered a tomb of Jesus and so on, and I went with them, and they gave me to read some Gnostic texts, and they blew my mind completely. Especially the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Thomas. And obviously the most famous saying of Gospel of Thomas, it is that if we knew how to cleanse the doors of perception, and I'm just paraphrasing here, we would see that everything is divine. And the reason why it blew my mind, because it was exactly what Tantra teaches, that nothing is evil, and everything is just a dance of divine consciousness. We just don't know how to get there. So the problem is, how can we bypass this barrier to experience divine? Another thing about Tantra is that it teaches us that everything, absolutely everything, can take us to the divine. So as in traditional Hinduism or traditional Western religions, there are so many do's and don'ts, and it's all based on obedience and morality and so on. There they say, with some warnings, that this is for highest disciples, that everything we do can actually take us to divine consciousness if we do it in the right state of mind. So, for example, and that's why, for example, in the West we focus on sexuality with Tantra, because we are a little bit obsessed there, and I experienced it myself as a younger woman. So basically, if we can do it in the right state of consciousness, we can do anything in the right state of consciousness, then it can take us to the divine, including drinking, including enjoying food, including sexual experiences. And in fact, I don't know how much you want me to talk about it, but actually when I was a very serious student of Tantra for many years, including with the very translator of a Sanskrit text of a greatest tantric philosopher in Hinduism, Abhinavagupta. And as I was studying it, I actually had the experience of Kundalini and experience of having my mind blown away through a sexual experience, basically, which is completely different than a regular sexual experience. It's just basically you feel the energy, which is called Kundalini energy in Hinduism, moving through your mind, and at a certain point it just moves in a different direction, not in the direction of sexual pleasure, but in the direction of a moment of complete enlightenment, and which spills on your partner as well. And interestingly, in Kashmir Shaivism and Tantra, this experience happens through a woman and spills to a man. So I actually had it experientially as well. And so, as I said, I was extremely happy with Tantra because it gave me a very good kind of grip on reality, understanding also that there was a warning there that you really have to do it in a proper state of consciousness, because otherwise it may lead to addiction. And it's often misused by people. And like in many esoteric traditions of East and West, they always warn you that this can be misused, because what in esoteric Western tradition is called magic, in Eastern esoteric tradition is called the siddhis, which means the powers that we can achieve through different practices, and that it is really important not to focus on this. So the same, for example, with sexual practices in Tantra, it is important not to focus on the act, but on what this act can bring to you. And the most kind of radical work in Tantra on sexuality as a form of achieving enlightenment is called the Kula ritual, which is I think 29th chapter of the work of Tantra Loka by a philosopher called Abhinavagupta, 10th century Indian philosopher. And some people took it to the limit. For example, some famous tantrikas, radical tantrikas, which are practitioners of Tantra, called Kapalikas, they smothered their bodies with ash, and they had a tantric consort, and they performed sexual practices on graves and so on. But the whole idea, they were extremely radical, and they were like the rebels of Tantra. So the whole point of that was to prove that anything you do can take you to a divine, as long as you do it in a proper state of consciousness. Another part of Tantra that really interested me was that this very radical ritual, because it's called Kula ritual in Tantra, was actually started by a female philosopher called Arda Triambaka, or half Triambaka, which was a daughter of another philosopher called Triambaka. And she introduced it in a sense to empower women and introduce women to philosophy. The Tantra itself actually is this kind of rebellious branch of Hinduism, because as we know, Hinduism is extremely caste-oriented, and it was only for males, and it was to have to be of proper caste. And Tantra said, no, everybody can experience divine in proper practice, and introduce this to all castes and all women, and women as well, which were completely excluded from from any spiritual practices, so to speak, except like a kind of proper worship. If you have no questions, then perhaps I will move on to why I got actually interested in Gnosticism. Apart from the fact that I noticed some similarities between Gnosticism and Tantra, when we talk about cleansing our perception, as it says in the Gospel of Thomas, that we cleanse our perceptions, actually everything is divine. Except that, we have so very few tools in the Western tradition, to see, how can we cleanse the perceptions. The Gnostics had the Gnosis, or the knowledge, but like in Tantra, the highest level of Tantra, they are very much encoded, which means unless you are of a very high level disciple, it was very difficult, to know what is it actually they were doing, simply because they were persecuted. Tantrics, like Gnostics, were persecuted, and they had to do everything in secret. So the secrecy was a big part of this. And of course, in Gnosticism also, because in the early centuries of Christianity, especially between 2nd and 4th centuries, were persecuted, and the church was being created as an institution. They really had to run for their lives, so to speak. So and their works were burned and buried, and it was very difficult to basically figure out what is it that they really did, and they were obviously in a very difficult situation there. So when I went to Jerusalem and to the Holy Land, I had, it's an actually funny story, because as I said, I thought I was okay, I am just Eastern esoteric and so on. And I started to read Gnostic Gospels, and I started to have a very mystical experiences with Jesus, with Yeshua, actually not with Jesus, with Yeshua in the Holy Land. I don't know, I can share them with you if you want to. And I have to admit, so it's very candid here, that I was actually embarrassed. I was so embarrassed because I started to associate Christianity with, TV preachers and all the, I thought, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to be like a Jesus girl. And, I was just so obsessed with being a literary person, an academic, that it was so completely uncool. I thought, Jesus, if I was, like a Buddhist, it would be really a cool thing. But being like having a Yeshua experience is not cool. So actually, when I was writing my book, I was extremely, Jerusalem Diary, I was extremely self-conscious, because I kept in mind all the time, what will my literary and my academic friends think? And it took me so many years until now to completely get over it, and just to accept it, and accept, the wisdom of Gnostic teachings and so on. I'm still in the process of studying, and I'll write blogs about it, about, the praxis or the practice of Gnostics, what they actually did, ritualistically, and also in methods and toolbox, so to speak, of the Gnostics. So to figure out, how we can actually apply in our lives, except that what I really respect about them, it is that they sensed and they understood that the teachings of Yeshua or Jesus were completely corrupt in the process of institutionalization. And I'm sure people who are in the inner sanctum of Gnosis, know really well about it, so I'm not sure how much of this I have to cover. But basically, that we don't know what Jesus said. We just know what people interpreted what he said. And to simplify it, Gnostics believed that Jesus had 3 levels of teachings. The ones for, the simple fisherman, around the Sea of Galilee. The others for his disciples. And the third one only for most disciples, including Mary Magdalene and perhaps John as well. So basically, these were the esoteric teachers. And Gnostics believed that they were the carriers of the esoteric teachers. And we can also ask ourselves how far really Gnosticism goes, because some scholars believe that Gnosticism starts with Christianity. Others, obviously, that it's basically a mystical vein of any religion. So there is a different scholarly discussion about it as well. So I would like to ask you, any questions so far? Okay, if there are no questions, what would you like me to talk about? Should I talk about Mary Magdalene, a little bit more about Tantra, a little, because as I said, another question that I actually have for you, it is, would you prefer Zoom meetings? If you would like to come back, if somebody wants to, would you prefer, just put yes or no or not interested? If in the future, if we are going to meet, whether you would prefer to have Zoom meetings, so as I said, it's more interactive, and everybody can go on camera, and I think I'm also more comfortable with technology, because here I cannot see anybody, so I don't really know what you're interested in. No? Okay. So perhaps I will just then move on. I had one question from one viewer who asked that he's going through a bit a difficult situation, and feels a little bit doesn't know how to approach it, because for two reasons. One is a guilt, and the other one is not just a regular prayer, feels a little bit like begging and so on. So this is a very real question, and I completely can respond to it, because several times in my life, because I did live an adventurous life, believe it or not, and I experienced some hardships as well. That's a very difficult question, so what to do in a difficult situation, and there are many answers to this. So perhaps I will just try to answer this from my own experience, and also what I have learned from my teacher, from my spiritual teacher. So first of all, addressing your thing about guilt and begging. First of all, you're completely right, because I know that you too were brought up as a Catholic. The prayer feels like a begging, and we have this kind of inherent sense of guilt. However, guilt is really only like an invention of Western religion, so don't worry about the guilt. And you are right, begging is not the right thing. So part of the reason is that I think, and this is a little bit Gnostic interpretation, it is that we actually know that something is wrong, and we just don't know how to, that something stops us from, achieving this greatness that we have and dealing with a difficult situation. So if we have a damage, my belief that if there is a damage, it's in our mind that is blocking us somehow. And the damage in our mind is basically the negative kind of focus of our mind. So although I know that it may sound really irritating, and it's very difficult to do it in a really difficult situation that we face in life, I think the most important thing is not to focus on the negative situation. It means, instead of imagining, because this is where my mind certainly goes, instead of imagining the worst case scenario, trying to imagine a good case scenario. And for example, also in Kashmir Shaivism, they say that you have to go for what they call upward shift. So although if it doesn't even make sense for your common sense, it is really important to do something in a difficult situation that actually uplifts you. So for example, like, I don't know, like being nice to your partner, or doing something together that uplifts you. This is a little bit like, in modern terms, it's a little bit like following your intuition, because it actually brings your energy up and brings you closer to the divine, and then to all of its possibilities that are normally not open to us when we are in a very kind of low state of mind. Prayer helps, but my spiritual teacher told me that the kind of traditional Orthodox prayer is not very successful, simply because, exactly as you said, it is a form of begging. So the best prayer is in a kind of form of almost affirmation, which is already thanking for what you want to achieve. So for example, whatever it is that you're facing at the moment, saying, thank you for bringing this new opportunity to my life, that and try to feel it, try to create this positive shift in your mind and in your heart especially. Also, if you're interested, I'll send you a link. There is a particular school of meditation that actually involves just, putting your headphones and kind of putting on your headphones and puts you into a theta state of mind, which basically works on your subconscious. So if you want, I can send you this link, because you just don't have to focus, because otherwise meditation is kind of very focus oriented and sometimes difficult to practice. This you just basically put on your phones, and it works on your subconscious, and it helps you to focus on more on the creation of things in your life, rather than going down, which is not focus oriented. And I know that you're interested in music, so then that it can be very helpful. So just send me a message and let me know if you want me to send you the link to this one, because it is very helpful. Like I use it all the time. There are also more traditional methods, such as, for example, one that the mantra. And if you're interested, I can give you some mantras that I got from my teacher as well. So basically, the mantra is like repeating the names of the divine, and then they also uplift you. But then, you really have to focus on it. So it could be either Om Namah Shivaya, for example, or it could be Om Shri Matre Namaha, if you want to, because Om Namah Shivaya is appealing to male energy, which is consciousness. And Om Shri Matre Namaha is appealing to a female energy, which in esoteric Eastern traditions of Hinduism is appealing more to the action. So you want to actually create something in your life, which is probably in your situation more appropriate. So whichever you want, because mantra is for free. The other one that I send you a link, it's nothing to do with me. You have to basically buy a CD or go on MP3, and I think it's like $15 or something. But it's much easier. It's actually, in some ways, works faster. I wouldn't say more effective, but it works faster. Another advice that my spiritual teacher gave me about difficult situation, it is basically this. There are a few things you can do in a difficult situation. You can leave a difficult situation, which I think doesn't apply to you, and it's a little bit too easy. 2, you can change your attitude towards the bad situation. So basically, do not allow yourself to get really negative and panicky about it. And I know how difficult it is, because I've been in situations like that, and I totally gave in to panic. But then I was using mantra and chanting all the time, and it basically kept me alive for a few months in my life. And the other one is, so changing attitude is really important. Change your attitude. So it is really important. And another one thing, the last thing, and which you should not do in a difficult situation, is to complain, and if you can, not to worry. So anything, doesn't matter how irrational it feels, that can uplift you. It's called the Spanda principle in Eastern esoteric tradition. The upliftment, it actually takes you out of the situation. Because even in Gnostic terms, there was some external impetus that pulled you down in your consciousness, because it created fear and damage. Like I will talk in Gnostic terms, because I know that you're into Gnosticism. So the damage works this way, that it just triggers something in your soul, in your being, that creates fear, that creates anxiety, because it feeds. If it is an entity like damage, it feeds on your fears. Actually, Neil Kramer really writes about it really well. It creates fear. It creates fear and an anxiety and an addiction in human beings, because it feeds on that. It needs it, because it's a lower entity itself that assumes power over human beings. It's like a demon, basically. So just to rationalize it, anything that you do to get out yourself out of this lower mental state, that this external impetus, like, for example, I lost a job, or my partner left me, or, like, whatever, is just a trigger to pull you down, and then you go into, like, this demonic state of mind, so to speak, and then damage feeds on it. Whatever you do, not drugs, not alcohol. That's why meditation and this kind of affirmative prayer, thinking already, like you believe that it's already happened, or meditation are the best ways to, or doing something fun with your partner, is the way of putting yourself out of this demonic state of consciousness into a higher level of consciousness, and then, so to speak, the damaged entity, or whatever damage stands for, cannot feed on, and thus cannot create a further chaos in your life. So I hope it answered your questions. This is what your question. This is the best I can answer this question, and I know how you feel because I've been there and I've done that. And at that stage of my life, I didn't have access to this meditation that you just use through headphones, which goes you into a theta state of consciousness. What it means, theta, it means that it actually raises your brain waves to a higher level to which the damaged or demonic entities have no access, or your lower mind has no access to. And this way, without any effort, just by listening to it, it just basically slightly manipulates your brain waves. It takes you out of that. And if you can also be, slightly more positive about it, it just takes you out of the state of consciousness into where these entities that want to pull you down, or your own state of mind, or your own lower self, because there's different terminology, different traditions, doesn't have an access to. So I think this is the most rational explanation that I can give. But so when I didn't have access to this meditation through headphones, what I was doing was I was then heavily involved in chanting, and I was heavily involved in mantra. And this is frankly what kept me alive through some really, really tough months of my life. So I hope it makes sense. Yeah, thank you. I got some likes here, so I hope that it answered your questions. Okay. Sorry, I disappeared here for a moment. Okay, please let me know. Hi, Yashoda. Sorry, I didn't see it. Thank you. I'm glad that you like that I was frank. Thank you, Brad. Thank you. Thank you for your encouragement, because as you see, I'm a little bit nervous. You can hear it from my voice. Okay, Zoom is good. Thank you, Natalie. Can you speak on similarities Gnostic and Tantra ritual and practice? Gnostic is very good for me. New for me. Okay. Okay, and then in a moment, I will be open about this. What I had asked Joanna is how I approach the divine to ask for her guidance in dealing with hardship. Okay, good. Thank you, Ditch, because I didn't know if I can, bring it up openly. Thank you, Omar, for your encouragement, really. Thank you. And hi, Yashoda, again. And now I'm going to return to a question by Nadine, who says that Gnosticism is very new to her. And if I can speak about similarities between Gnosticism and especially rituals between Gnosticism and Tantra. So for people who don't know Nadine, Nadine is a tantrika, and she practices Tantra and teaches Tantra. Obviously she's very knowledgeable about Tantra, but Gnosticism is very new to her. So Nadine, I'm still exploring, and I'm just doing some serious research now about praxis and practices of Gnosticism, because so far, I studied lots of Gnosticism and appeal a lot to me, and I studied especially three Gnostic Gospels, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Gospel of Thomas, and Gospel of Philip, but my studies of us were not as much scholarly, because lots of people do it already very well, including Miguel Connor, with whom I'm also associated. But I was trying to study it from a point of from a point of a seeker, you know, as a seeker, what does it do for me? And I wrote some blogs about it. So if you want to go to my Goddess News blog, you know, you can check the blogs. And especially if you're interested, I know, not if you, I know that you're interested in Tantra, the Gnostic gospel of Philip is talking about, you know, about sexuality as well. So I think it would be very useful, you know, if you could read, for example, this blog, or even, you know, look into this particular gospel. However, as I said, and I'm saying it in full honesty, that's why I'm still studying it, that it took me several years to study the Kula ritual, which is the tantric ritual, to have some understanding of it. The reason why it is because these rituals were basically, including tantric rituals in Hinduism, were basically forbidden in the mainstream religion, and this is the same in West, like Gnosticism, and the same in Eastern Esoterica, like in Kashmir Shaidism, which is basically Tantra, because Tantra actually was born there. People don't often know it because they're often introduced to Tantra through Buddhism, actually, which, as we know, Buddhism is older than Hinduism. So it is extremely controversial topic because it's such a wild thing, you know, like these Brahmins. And I completely adore Abhinavagupta, who is one of the greatest Eastern philosophers ever. He is like the Leonardo da Vinci of Eastern philosophy. This man knew every philosophy of the East. He's a 10th century Indian from Kashmir, Indian philosopher who also knew Buddhism in great depth. He knew everything, all right? And then he writes his work, which is The Light on Tantras, called Tantra Loka. And in one of the chapters, which is, you know, the chapter 29, which is itself that big, you know, it's all about this wild, you know, sexual ritual that Brahmins, that normally are not allowed to drink wine, they are not allowed to eat meat, you know, they're not allowed anything, basically, you know, just recite Sanskrit mantras, right? They decide that through, you know, the Kula ritual, which was actually invented by a woman philosopher, Arda Triyampaka, you know, that you can reach higher states of consciousness through sexuality, because they said it is such a power, you know, like, let's not kid ourselves, you know, if something is powerful, sexuality it is. Unfortunately, sexuality most of the time is driving us crazy because look what the media is exposing us to. Complete nonsense. You know, we're just using women or using men, or you want men to be virile all the time and women to be sexy all the time, and we use each other's bodies. It's complete nonsense. And I think in Gnostic terms, it would be again like it's the damage, or in Hindu terms, it's like the illusion, the great Maya, you know. Somebody doesn't want us, you know, in mainstream to actually know that this is a great power. You know, we just don't know how to use it. So this philosopher said to the Brahmins, you know, this is a great power. And since we are, you know, we actually know the scripture, and if we do it in the right state of consciousness, and with a focus on achievement of enlightenment rather than, you know, getting high off somebody, you know, if we create a sexual ritual, you know, which is very complex, which involves saying of the mantras, you know, for long time, only the most advanced disciples were invited to the ritual. And then basically in this higher state of consciousness, you know, what from the outside would basically look like an orgy, which it wasn't, because it was a guru and the chosen disciples, female and male disciples, were meeting together, saying mantras in a beautiful room with, you know, garlands of flowers, as it is in Hinduism. They would be giving special oils, you know, and by saying mantras, you know, they would massage each other's sexual organs. And the man was supposed to see the yogini, the woman, as the expression of goddess Shakti that created the whole universe. And I don't know how deeply you want me to go to this, because it can be quite descriptive. So it's up to you, because I'm open to this. You know, and a woman, when she was massaging the organs of a man, was supposed to worship him as Shiva. And then they actually involved in a sexual intercourse, which could or could not involve ejaculation, because this lack of ejaculation is actually later a Taoist and Buddhist addition, because you have to preserve the energy, life energy, and so on. But in the original Tantra, they were not so focused on that at all. And then, if Shakti really enters you, if you really worship your female partner as a goddess, and you worship your male partner as the representation of God Shiva, as divine consciousness as well, then, this is also an act of grace involved in it. And I know, because I experienced it, like I actually didn't know that I did anything differently, and I can elaborate on it. The energy, Goddess Shakti energy, which in this respect is called Kundalini, you actually can physically, and it's a mind-blowing experience, feel the energy moving along your spine. In my case, it stopped right in the heart, exploded, Then, after a moment, it moved and exploded in my third eye. And in the moment, and I'm being extremely candid here, so I hope you don't hold it against me, I wrote a blog about it, so just as well, instead of, having just like great sexual experience, you actually feel that this consciousness, this energy that was moving through you becomes conscious, and it made a conscious choice. Rather than moving just to physical pleasure, it moves in a different direction, and it puts you in a heightened state of consciousness that only extremely high meditative process, sometimes the process of Shakti path, and some of you know what I'm talking about, and if not, I can explain, can take you. And suddenly you one with the whole cosmos, you one with the whole universe, you feel a particle of divine consciousness. And in Tantric tradition, this consciousness feels on a male partner. So in a way, it makes a woman and an equal, woman and a man equal, because a man needs a woman, because the energy Shakti moves through the woman and spills to the man. So unfortunately, very often in later in Tantric traditions, this is what happened, that women were being, because really, maybe not anymore, but or to a degree, it's sort of like women were not equal for a long time, let's face it, right? So then certain gurus started to use it just, to get this heightened. I don't believe that they were doing it for sex. They just were using it to get a heightened state of consciousness. The problem with this is that if you use a yogini, a female partner, who is not ready for something like that, then once you're in this heightened state of consciousness, it feels perfect. But the problem is, that once you fall down from this heightened state of consciousness, it feels exactly like you were on drugs and fell down. And then you go back to normal kind of human state of consciousness, in which it suddenly feels, what happened, right? What happened? Why have I done it? And so it's extremely political, and I don't know if I want to get involved in this, because some of you know there were big scandals involved with this and so on, and I don't support that anyway, the use of women to getting high for gurus. However, it is much more complex than people actually want to admit, because suddenly you elevate it to this extremely high level of consciousness, and you fall down, and it's extremely confusing. So, for example, even when you go for a regular Shakti path is basically awakening of divine energy through the movement of Kundalini through the torch, Guru's torch. And it's a very ritualistic, esoteric tradition. Nothing to do with sex. Just, a Guru torches you. And even through this, like I had an extremely powerful experience during the Shakti path, and it felt exactly like that. Similarly, I felt like I was one with the entire universe, and when I fell, it felt like I couldn't even function in a regular materialistic universe for several months, because the contrast was too much. Because through the Guru's torch, or through Tantric ritual, sexual ritual, you suddenly, this barrier between Maya, or in Gnosticism, the barrier of the demiurge is removed. And suddenly you one with everything. You experiencing the mystical oneness with the universe. Except because we are not enlightened yet, like I am not enlightened. I just had an enlightening experience through Shakti path and through tantric experiences, and also through in Jerusalem through experiences with Gnostic Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which blew my mind as well. And I'm really grateful for them, for all of these experiences. Because we are not enlightened, we fall down. So what is the difference between enlightened being and us who had experiences like that? Regular humans who are just, it is that for me, it was like going on a lift, seeing God, and then, you know, going down and hitting the ground. When an enlightened human being like the Buddha, like Yeshua, which I believe, and there are some interesting beliefs, Gnostic beliefs about Jesus and Yeshua. Some, for example, I'm reading on Helen Blavatsky now, Madame Blavatsky, who says that Jesus was a regular, you know, Jewish rabbi, and he just was entered through grace, you know, through the door. Grace entered him, and Christ consciousness, the Christos, entered him, which is, you know, universal consciousness. That's why, you know, for example, at the end, he became human again. So, you know, he suffered on the cross because, according to her, because, you know, the divine consciousness left him, because divine consciousness doesn't die. So suddenly, you know, it left him. So he had almost the same experience, right? When you live in a divine consciousness, in this Christos or, you know, Shakti, and suddenly you just bang, you know, hit the ground. Now, the Buddha or Yeshua doesn't hit the ground. You know, they just are capable of holding it. Now, I wasn't, for example, I had this experience, and I said several, and I'm very grateful for them, but I wasn't able to hold it. So suddenly you just crashed to the ground. And the wisdom my teacher taught me of this experience is that then at least you were giving the divine vision. And now for spiritual practice, which in Hinduism is called sadhana, and in Gnosticism is called Gnosis, through spiritual practice, you climb your way up there. And it is it's a form of self-discipline, but not self-discipline, you know, that you're flagellating yourself. None of this kind, but kind of mental mindfulness, remembering through daily choices, you know, is it higher self or lower self, I'm sorry, or higher self, you know, which one is it that is guiding me? So it requires, if anything, mindfulness, you know, make the choice, every single daily choice. Is it based on the ego, which means survival and fear that will feed the damage or the lower self? Or is it feeding my higher consciousness? And it is an agony, I'm telling you. It is an agony because our survival instinct, which is ego, will tell you every time to do the wrong thing. Like stay in the job because it pays the bills. Doesn't matter that it kills you. That's the ego, right? And the soul is telling you, wow, take the risk. But can you take the risk? I can even feel the pain in my stomach now just discussing it, you know, because the fear is the damage. The fear is the Maya. Now, I'm sorry because I carried away myself here and I see that I have a comment. Bradley Kelly, implied by Tantra and other practice, can open us to the experience of phenomenal non-dual reality. I would like to hear a conversation about the phenomenal transmission of knowledge that can occur in the states of consciousness. Thank you. Okay, I have to read it again. I would like to hear a conversation about the phenomenal transmission of knowledge that can occur. Okay, that's a very good question, Brad. And in the Kula ritual, because I feel a little bit more at this stage knowledgeable about it, in the Kula ritual, and I say again, it is so controversial and it's in a sense kind of almost kinky when you talk about it. In the Kula ritual, it says that during the sexual ritual, which is called the Kula ritual, of tantric sexual ritual, every word that the lovers say to each other is a form of tantra. Why? Because they're in a heightened state of consciousness, and it's almost like a telepathic conversation, which means even if you say like silly loving things to each other, but ideally it would be the mantra, but they say even, you know, then you exchange your experiences almost telepathically, spiritual experiences to each other. And it even says that, you know, when in the last moment of sexual intercourse, when he says when the Shakti, which is the female participant, right, who represents the goddess Shakti, gives out the sigh, ah, you know, this is the most divine mantra. And then she, again, the woman, transmits this divine knowledge telepathically to a man. So it's a very much, at least in Kula ritual, it's very much almost like a telepathic transmission of knowledge, rather than like in Gnosticism, from so far so I know, which is more like a knowledge. But I'm still exploring it, and in 2 or 3 months I write a complete blog about it when I feel like, you know, I have enough knowledge about it, because I'm doing research about it right now. But in the Kula ritual, it is actually a telepathic transformation. It's basically Kundalini that is rising to the third eye of a woman, transmits the experience, the immediate experience of the divine, which is called intuition, which is called Sophia in Gnosticism, and in Christianity is called, Thomas Aquinas called it intellection, which is basically immediate grasp of the divine, transmits the immediate grasp of a divine to a man, and man has this experience then. So it's not like she says something, or they are having suddenly like enlightened conversation after, you know, after that. No, it is that she transmits from a third eye to a third eye this immediate, this intellection, this intuition, this Sophia, this grace, this experience of an immediate grasp of the divine, from her movement of a Kundalini energy to his third eye. So I don't know if it explains what I'm saying, your question gives an answer to your question or not, but this is how it is more or less understood and explained in the Kula ritual. Having said so, even the translator of Kula ritual, even the translator of a Kula ritual, you know, he translated it. You can buy it, and if you want, I can send you a link. You know, it's a great scholar translated it, and it's by very good publisher and so on. It's almost unreadable. So I said I spent about a year and a half going to him and going page by page by page by page by verse by verse by verse, because the whole translation is encoded so regular mortals, so to speak, who are not ready for the experience. And this is all the same. It's for Western and Eastern Esoterica. You know, you have to be sure it's for you, because even Abhinavagupta says this is a dangerous knowledge. You know, this is not for everybody. This is the same like magic is not for everybody, because most people use it, you know, to get a good job, you know, or have him to fall in love with me, or whatever, stupid reasons, not the right reasons, right? So this is a dangerous knowledge, and you have to be ready to head for this. So it was, and also they were afraid of being persecuted, like the Gnostics. So it is encoded. So we are basically, not only it was translated from the Sanskrit, but if you just read the translation from the Sanskrit, it makes no sense. So it is just like decoding, like Enigma during World War II, you know, it's like decoding this. So it's written in a language, but you know what language it really is, because if you just read it, it's still, it's not intelligible. And now Ada here says, the fear is real, the heart is crying. And absolutely. Ada, I cannot tell you how much, I'm scared most of my life. But I like actually another tantric philosopher, modern tantric philosopher, which I think was very much ridiculed. And maybe he was a bit too radical for his times. Osho once said, he said, courage is not to be afraid to do something. That's stupidity. Courage is being afraid and doing it. And I think that actually spiritual enlightenment and evolution of human spirit, which I totally, absolutely believe in, and I'm a great practitioner of, is being afraid and making the right choices anyway. And the right choice is not right choice by societal standards, because they are usually wrong choices. Wrong choices because society tells you to do what, to keep it going, which is to keep the status quo. The status quo will not give you liberation. It will not give you Gnosis. It will not give you moksha, which means liberation. You have to make a choice that scares hell out of you to evolve. And not only my heart is crying, my stomach is turning, even as I said when I'm saying it. But this is the only way to do it. This is the only way to evolve. And actually, one of my favorite literary moments is from Bruce Chatwin's book, beautiful book actually about Australia, Songlines, in which he says the first human who stood up, in the savannah, and he's afraid, that lions will eat him, and whatever. And he says, I am. He's the first evolutionary being. But even Eckhart Tolle said even more beautifully in one of his books when he said the first blade of grass that decided to blossom was scared shitless, sorry for the word, because what's going to happen to me. But because it took this risk, it was the first blade of grass to blossom. And I think this is really a beautiful, beautiful metaphor for human evolution, for evolution of human consciousness. And this is what Gnostics and Trust and Tantrics also believed. All esoteric traditions. Or the first reptile that said, I'm going to fly. And of course, scary, like fly, are you mad? We're always to the ground, you're a reptile. But to have this courage to take the first flight, it changes everything. And just to perhaps sum up, because I think I've probably been talking for forever and everybody's tired of my accent and of everything, it's just, if you think about both Eastern and Western esoteric tradition, they will tell you this: be scared and do this anyway. Evolution of human consciousness is real. You are a divine being. You know in your very core of yourself that you're a divine being. There are some powers in this society, perhaps even in this universe, but let's not focus on them because they like our attention, right? That they want you to believe that you have to go on your knees and pray to some God, when in fact the God wants to express itself through you. And in fact, my recent blog was talking about both Teilhard de Chardin and Irish philosopher from the Middle Ages, who were, of course, one considered heretic and the other, completely disregarded by church, that tell you human evolution is inevitable and it's the evolution of human consciousness. The only way that God can experience itself is through us. Through its, I said its because it's both human, it's both male and female for me. God is goddess, and goddess is God. Mother, Father, Holy Spirit, in Western tradition, right? Or Shakti, Shiva in Eastern tradition. Through us, and we are in such privilege, and this is what Carl Jung was also saying, another of my heroes. We are in such privilege, he said, position, because we are between an animal and angel, which means we have access to both, infinite access to the spirit. And yet at the same time, we have an infinite access to this sensual experience of embodiment, which unfortunately brings fear, which unfortunately brings pain, which unfortunately brings, death. But then death is not real, because then your spiritual part detaches and moves on. So what we have to focus is what other, esoteric teachers say, They say, believe that you're a soul on a sensual experience. You're here to learn. And I was recently partaking in a podcast with also Regina Meredith of Gaia TV, which some of you I'm sure are very familiar with. And she said she is very much a part of esoteric tradition too, of some different hermeneutic tradition of which I don't, she didn't divulge which one. She says, no one, all the esoteric traditions say that each of us chose to be here. So this is supposed to be hell of an adventure. But once we embody, suddenly the Demiurge, the Maya, and we are just like, what the, know, all of these limitations and all of this brainwashing and all of these societal rules, and we get lost. So I think the reason why I'm trying to have these talks, and I think that perhaps next time we will do the Zoom, so as I said, it's more equal and everybody can speak up if you're interested. It is that, and now I lost the plot. It is that to remember this, and sometimes the best thing to say is, I remember I'm here. You know, I don't have to accomplish anything. I'm not here to be a professor, which I thought I was. I'm not here to get like on a New York Times bestsellers list, which I thought I was. You have no idea how it tormented me for most of my life, because I had to be the best as an academic. I had to be the best in literary world, and it was a torment to let it go. It was nothing short of torment. It took years and even decades for me to let it go, because this is not why we are here. We are here for this adventure, and Shiva is the greatest adventurer, and Shakti is the greatest adventurer, and we are these fantastic souls on this fantastic adventure. We just don't remember. So I think the whole key is to remember. So it's been an hour. I hope we have all learned something. I really am so grateful that so many of you showed up. And I think that it was, I hope it was a little bit helpful, because I have this great desire, you know, to connect with people and also to share, you know, this really strange obsession of mine that I have, you know, of esoteric traditions. And I think that we suffer. Humanity suffers, you know, I suffer. And so that's why I really relate to also what Beach and Ada said, you know. We do suffer because it's hell of a pain. But this is exactly what is required of us, not suffering, but actually have the gut, you know, to raise above the suffering, because this is the true experience of the existence lies. So, you know, I wanted to finish it on a kind of optimistic note, because I absolutely, totally believe in it. And that's why I committed my blog to this kind of message, because I think that sometimes we focus too much on these demonic powers and so on, which are real, you know, most likely. But I don't want to give them any attention, because as I said before, they love the attention. Because once we give them attention, we also start to fear them. And this is what actually brings us down. And in fact, we have to have what Kashmir Shaivism calls the spanda, or Gnostics say, you know, the Gnosis, which lift us up out of this fear and tell us the truth about our existence and the truth about our connection with the divine, which is, you know, we are all one, and we are one with the divine. So if you don't have any other questions, or if you want to connect, you know, through my blog, or send me a message and I'll just check. Thank you so much. So as I said, I'm really, really grateful that you showed up. And send me a message if you want to perhaps make it like in a monthly event or something. Then if so, even if there are two people apart from me who are interested, then I'll probably make it into a Zoom meeting, because it's probably more convenient. And as I said, I don't like to like look at the screen and see my face, you know. So I would rather see your faces. So let's do it this way. And thank you so much. And I hope that it made your Sunday better. And remember, you're a divine being on a great adventure. Thank you.